Hi guys, thank you again. Welcome back to Soulful Sunday with Rhea, if you love me. And I am so excited. I have a new guest. Tell them who you are, what you do, all that good stuff, Laura. Oh, I said your name.
Spoiler alert, I'm Laura. I'm Laura Folks. I'm a certified holistic health coach, and I live in Chicago and love working with people to transform their relationships with food.
Shot-town in the house.
That's right.
Laura, tell us a little bit about how you journeyed into becoming a holistic health coach. What did that look like for you? Did you always know you were going to be an entrepreneur? Like, yeah, tell us.
Yes, and no, I never thought that I was going to be an entrepreneur. When I first got my degree from college, I was working in advertising. And at the
Okay.
beginning of my career, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a CEO at some point of an agency. And then as I got into my career, I was like, yeah, no, I don't want that. I don't want that responsibility. And yeah, that's not going to happen.
Okay.
And then I started losing my passion for the career and my job. And um, I never thought of being an entrepreneur, but it kind of just happened. And I am so glad it did because I love it. And of course, like I've changed over the years too.
For
So,
sure.
um, yeah, things that the way I felt when I was, in my late 20s versus now is completely different. But so that's a little bit about entrepreneurship and my path kind of to that. But in to get to become a health coach, I really struggled with my weight starting around the age of 12 and did every diet, would lose weight, gain it all back plus more. I thought that I was meant to be like, I thought I was big boned and just thought that I was meant to be in a bigger body.
Mm-hmm.
And I started my first diet when I was 13 with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I got to a point where I was really burnt out from dieting
Mm-hmm.
and just felt like food was a battle, was consumed by my body, my weight, my about food, and ended up going through a 3-year process to lose weight. And I ended up losing 60 pounds.
Wow.
And this was while I was working in advertising. And as I was starting to lose my passion for that job and career, people were coming to me asking me for advice and guidance. And they were saying, like, how do you keep your motivation and your willpower up? Like, help guide me through my journey. And I
Yeah.
really enjoyed that. So when I learned about health coaching in 2013, I decided to go get my certification in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I thought that health coaching would be what I wanted to do, but didn't know much about the job or the career or anything. But after I started getting my certification, within like 2 months, things at the agency I was at got really bad. So I ended up quitting. And I was also around the same time introduced to my health coach. And I started working with her around in a program called Truce with Food. And
Okay.
in that program and process, we really start to understand and figure out why we eat and
Mm-hmm.
what food, how we're using food as protection
Okay.
and how our past is still controlling us today and how that's showing up
Oh.
around food.
Oh, can
And
you dig into that just a little bit?
yeah, because it's so spoiler again, like that's the work that I do with my clients now, because after going through that process, I was like, okay, it's not just about what we're eating, it's why we're eating and helping
Mm.
to figure out and get to the root cause and the real reason why we fall off track. So I've actually been
Oh,
now
listen, you talking good, Laura.
yeah, so I've actually like gone through a certification with her,
Hmm.
and so now I'm trained in that process and approaches, which is what I take my clients through.
Yeah.
Um, but so yeah, so food as protection, like a lot of times when we feel like we're eating out of alignment with our goals, whether that's self-sabotaging, if we're binge eating, emotionally eating, or on the flip side, it can even be not eating. Like some of my clients will say, I'm so busy throughout the day and I'm so focused on work that I'm not really thinking about nourishing myself and they
Hmm.
just forget to eat. So that's
Yeah.
a form of protection as well.
Mm.
And so that's all usually a symptom that there's something else happening where we are feeling emotionally or physically unsafe in some way. And not physically unsafe meaning like you're walking outside in the dark and you feel like somebody's following you. It's like
Right.
physically more from like a physiological standpoint where like our blood
Mm.
sugar is may not be balanced, or we're not eating the right mix of foods for our bodies.
Wow. So when you were talking about like self-sabotage, how can somebody like identify like, yo, I think I'm sabotaging based upon, you know, what I say I want and how how it will literally affect their business as well if they're sabotaging health wise as well as business, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So sabotage, the interesting thing with self-sabotage is it may mask itself where it feels like it's pretty innocent. So it could be if you've ever thought like, oh, I'm just going to eat this pizza because I deserve it after having a long day, or, um, screw it, I'm just going to eat this ice cream, this whole pint of ice cream, or gallon of ice cream, even though I'm not really hungry.
Mm,
Those can be forms of self-sabotage, even though they might feel innocent because it's like, I deserve it. Like it seems like it's almost a reward. But if there's ever some guilt or shame around that, or feeling like, okay, once I eat this pizza or ice cream or whatever, I
mhm.
need to now gear up and get back on track, and feel like now I'll be able to start or get back to doing the things that I want to do. Anytime
Yeah,
it feels like there's a disconnect between having the desire, like a strong desire to do something,
right.
but not actually sticking to it, and we fall off track for some reason, and whether that's with the I deserve it, screw it, or having some guilt or shame or anything around that, those can be signs and times where you are sabotaging,
Wow.
without necessarily recognizing it.
Wow. Wow. So don't eat the pizza.
Well, no. So the thing is, this is so I'm glad you mentioned that, because
Okay.
in the work that I do, there's never a time where we talk about what you should or shouldn't eat, because you can eat
Mm,
any food.
yeah.
It's being able to eat a little bit of the pizza, or being in choice around the pizza, because a lot of times we feel out of control around food or our bodies or weight, but often that's
Mm,
because we're feeling out of choice with it. And
mhm.
so if we approach it more from, once we figure out what is actually causing you to want the pizza and eat it in excess, because again, like I had pizza on Friday night and I had a couple of pieces, and then we froze the rest of it and we'll eat it at another time, right? Like,
Okay.
and it was a choice and I moved on from it.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of like the shame spiral that happens afterwards, or feeling like you can't stop at just a couple of or a few pieces when you get full and you keep eating afterwards and then you feel sick after that, that's when we want to look at it to see, is there something emotional happening
Mhm.
there?
Mhm.
Because you can still have your pizza or your ice cream, your cake, your cookies, or whatever, and it's just a matter of not being triggered by it and feeling
Right.
like you have to. A lot of people will say like, it feels like the pizza's talking to me or my refrigerator is calling me, and like the food has a voice. But it should be that you can eat it, have it, enjoy it, and move on from it. So it's not that you can't have it, it's just not feeling like there's so much weight around it.
Mm, got it. So what does it look like? What would someone, okay, say if someone is experiencing, um, if they're listening to this and they're like, I may be experiencing a level of self-sabotage. Maybe I need to do something, or maybe how would I truly identify like this is an issue and I need to get help? I need to call Laura at this point.
I'm going to answer this with talking through the unconscious cycle that we're typically going through when
Mm,
we're self sabotaging or feeling like we're falling off track, because I find that just even sharing what that cycle is, it gives people some insight into what could be happening. And if there's parts of this that resonate with you, where you're like, oh, yes, that's me, that's me, that's me too, it can be hard to see because we're like, I love this analogy of like, we're like a fish in the water that we can't, but we don't see the water that we're in.
mm,
It's so close to us that we can't necessarily see when it's
yes.
happening. And a lot of times it feels like it's just the way things are, versus what where it's typically coming from is that how we were socialized to be, and without having a lot of context of what was happening often when we were younger, we don't fully understand what's actually going on. We don't know how to get all of the information to see what is actually happening, so we make it about us.
So it's an
So
ego thing.
it's kind of ego, but it's typically from when, for me and a lot of my clients, it's coming from like a younger wounded side of ourselves, and it was formed as a way to protect ourselves. Like all of this stuff comes
Got
up
it.
as protection.
Got it.
So the cycle is, and I'll go through it pretty quickly. There's more information on my website. And if any of this you want me to dig into further, I can do that too. But the cycle starts with a trigger, and there's 4 common triggers that trip it off and that lead us to eat. And that's feeling tired, anxious, inadequate, or lonely. And it's not usually like one big event that trips off the cycle. It can be an accumulation of a lot of little events and a lot of these triggers that happen throughout the day. From there, we have a story. And this is where we were socialized and didn't have the full context of what was happening. And that's where we made it about us. So for me, when I was bullied in middle school, I made that mean that I failed. I was being misunderstood without knowing that there could be something else with these bullies, or like not having the full context of what was actually happening.
Yeah.
So that created for me this story of, if I misunderstood, I could be judged, rejected, and end up alone. And so anytime in my life I felt misunderstood, even when I was working in advertising, sending out emails, if somebody kind of didn't understand what I was saying, then that would trigger my story and would lead me to eat when I got home.
Got it. How else could someone be affected? Say if it's not food, what are other areas that someone can say they're relating to this story? Like, oh yeah, this sounds familiar, but my thing is not food.
Yeah. That's such a great question, because it can be, I've worked with a client on a couple clients actually, on biting and picking their nails, because there was a lot of shame and guilt around that too. And it was a very similar cycle that would happen with mindless shopping. It can come up with not working out, even though we want to go to the gym or get some activity in. With drinking, it can come up there too. So yeah, there's a few different, those are a few different examples of things, of places that it can show up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shopping.
And more mindless shopping, or if it's like mindlessly shopping, or even, I mean, it can be a similar thing where it's like, I don't really need those shoes, but oh, screw it. Like, I've had a rough day, I deserve it. Or, I mean, it can be a lot of the same talk that can show up around even shopping as it does around food.
Yes. Okay. That's so good. How can this affect somebody who is trying to, literally either run a team or grow a business? How can these things, and I'll answer the next question after you do this.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating, because for me, starting my business was like spiritual boot camp. And I learned so much about myself to see how much this cycle and my story were triggered. And just to complete the cycle really quickly, like, we have those triggers and then the story, then we have stress responses, which are to compete, accommodate, or avoid. And for me, I was a huge competitor in my business, where I was
This
comparing.
is good, Laura.
Thanks. Yeah, I would really it's not necessarily where we're competitive, but like, I would compare myself to other people a lot and their businesses, feeling like I was behind, feeling like I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I thought that I should have been able to, within a year, go from making 0 to 6 figures, right, without having a lot of context. But then when that didn't happen, I was like, what's wrong with me? How I'm failing? And how are these other people doing it? And, that's where the competitor was coming in.
For sure.
And then accommodating is like people pleasing, putting people's needs ahead of your own, and avoiding is procrastinating and not taking action. From there, we have behaviors, which are some of those behaviors I mentioned. Then we eat out of alignment with our goals, or we shop or drink or bite or pick our nails. We lose self-trust, and then it loops back into the trigger. So what was interesting in business, what is interesting is anytime our stories are triggered, that cycle can be tripped off. Or if we are feeling anxious around some uncertainty that's happening in our business, which happens, I mean, when you're first starting a business, it is just uncertain, right? Like you
Right,
don't
for
know
sure.
what's going to happen. You don't know when you're going to get your next client. Feeling inadequate, feeling like you, as a beginner, you might feel like you're not good enough. You might have that imposter syndrome, feel like you're failing at different times. And it's all the meaning that we're making of different situations. So that's how the cycle can show up for people in their business. And it can lead to self-sabotage, either where if like you are an avoider in that stress response, some people can walk away from their businesses when things get really hard because they're like, oh, this is really scary and hard, or they will procrastinate and just not take action for a while.
Yeah.
And we can self-sabotage by comparing also, where then it feels like we're not good enough, or then try to do things that are outside of our values and not aligned with us and our values because we're trying to be or do what other people are doing. So that's some ways that this can show up in our business.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's how or what are ways for someone once they've recognized, okay, yeah, this definitely sounds like me. What are some practical steps that someone can take, or do you feel like somebody can kind of do this on their own, or they actually need a partner or to co partner to like walk through this process?
Depending on what somebody's goal is and how deep they want to go, I think it can be helpful to have somebody to go through that journey, because there can be so many blind spots and there's so many layers to it too, that you may be able to scratch the surface on your own, but then it, depending on how deep you want to go, because it can go pretty deep pretty fast and it can
Yeah.
be hard work too. So it depends
Yeah.
on how open you are to
Yeah.
doing the deep work.
The work. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
But
sounds to me that I know I wouldn't want to go through that process alone,
mhm,
personally.
yeah.
Um, because it sounds to me that once you get to a certain stopping point, especially someone who's experiencing these levels of um of sabotage, of frustration, of triggers, that they will almost sabotage the healing process as
Yeah.
well, even if they got to a certain point. Is that about right?
Yeah, and even sometimes when you've got support, some people can do that too, because then if they don't realize how deep this work goes and they thought that they were ready to do the work, but then they get into it and they're like, ooh, I'm really not ready for this,
Mm,
then they might walk away even from getting the support, but at least they know
wow.
it's there for when they are ready.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I think I'm the same way. Like I always get coaches whenever I feel like I need support. So I'm totally a huge advocate for coaching. Um,
Right.
but I also do think, yeah, that not everybody is ready. So that's why like my approach isn't right for everybody, because not everybody is ready or wanting to do this type of work.
How do you know when you're ready?
I so I always say if you've got a curiosity around it, and a lot of my clients are at a place where they're starting to feel hopeless that things can change, and that, but they don't want to be hopeless. Like they want things to change,
Mhm.
and that they're ready to just like, they're ready to stop feeling so weighed down and stuck with
Mm,
what's happening,
yeah,
that they're just like ready and willing to do what it will take.
whatever.
And if somebody's on the fence about it, I mean, even starting small, like, so I have my free 40-minute curiosity call that I do with people, but then
Okay.
if somebody's not 100% sure if they're ready to do the work, then I always say, let's just start with the first session and see how it feels. And how you feel afterwards. Because a lot of
Yeah.
times people feel lighter after the first session and they're like, ooh,
Yeah.
this is different. Okay, this is giving me a lot of clarity.
Got it.
I do want to do this.
Okay, cool. Dope, dope, dope. What it's so much. It's so much because this is so good. Because this is talking about the I feel like a lot of people I've shared my story personally with you, but I feel like a lot of people have a level of trauma that they have experienced, but they don't realize how much it can impact. But then you go into entrepreneurship, which can also bring trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have trauma, you have the trauma that you've tried to hide, and then you've put another load on top of you of, like you said, what competitiveness that you can which can be a trigger. What was the other
The
three?
accommodator and avoider.
Right. So you can have somebody coming in, maybe wanting to team up with somebody and thinking partner and thinking that, they're taking all the responsibility, and then, it's just so many things that can happen when you come into entrepreneurship, and you having that level of trauma. And I feel like it almost, in the sabotage that can happen behind it, because of the fact that you are unable to recognize what is truly happening. So I
Yep.
feel like this can help so many people, at least be able to recognize, like, oh my goodness, this is why this is happening. And that it doesn't necessarily just have to be with food, but it's, can be other ways as well that this can show up in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, what is holistic, as a holistic coach, what does all that entail? What does that look like?
First, I just want to say too, with where we can sabotage, a
Okay.
couple other areas, as you were just
Yes.
talking through that, are
Yes.
relationships and also in our career or in our businesses as well. And it's really interesting because a lot of times the work that I do with my clients, they usually are either going through a transition, just went through one, or are gearing up for one, which can
Mm,
be, there's a lot of uncertainty and it can
mm,
feel like we don't have control over what's happening often. And that's where then we feel out of control around food or our bodies or weight. And so it's interesting because a lot of times the work that I do with people, there tends to be shifts in their careers or relationships, as well as the relationship with food and themselves,
mm.
and potentially around working out or whatever
Yeah.
the areas are. But I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that too, because relationships and career can be another place.
Yeah. Can we dig into that before you answer that question though?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look boy, because I feel like you're walking down my street. So
And
so
that's why we're here.
that's why we're here, right? So what does that truly look like, when it starts, affecting your relationships and um yeah,
It's
or your
interesting.
business, right?
Yeah. So in relationships, it can be, if we think about like the trauma and how our past can be showing up today and controlling us today. And also, a lot of it, like I said earlier, is about the meaning that we're making of things.
Mm-hmm.
If we're functioning from this like wounded younger side of ourselves and we're trying to protect ourselves, if you think about relationships and communication, if there's ever times that your partner triggers you, right? If you're in a fight or if you have an argument of some sort, you may
Mm-hmm.
not realize how what they say or do is triggering you and what that's triggering in you. So then you react in a way that might trigger them as well. And so it can create this conflict and can make us feel really unsafe too in that relationship. So if I were in a relationship where I was constantly feeling misunderstood, that would trigger the crap out of me because that's my story, right? Is not wanting to be
Mm-hmm.
misunderstood. And then
Mm-hmm.
if I'm living on edge of like, are they going to misunderstand me and reject me and leave me? Then it's like you're trying to protect yourself. But then you're also could sabotage the relationship by trying to preemptively, like that could be where it's like, well, let me just leave before they leave me. And
Mm-hmm.
even though that doesn't serve you. So that's just one example around the relationships of how this cycle can show up and how it's protective, but it's also sabotaging in some ways.
Wow. Wow. Mm. So okay. Hmm. I have like four questions and I'm trying to put it in one, but because what about clients? What is that? How could that show up in the area of clients if you're a service-based business, or even if you're not? You could be running products, but maybe somebody called in and complained about a thing, but you're taking this as them rejecting you, but it's really just whatever happened.
Yep. Yeah. So even with me, when I first started
Mm-hmm.
with coaching as the competitor, the mindset that I would be in with the stress
Mm-hmm.
responses,
Mm-hmm.
I often felt like I wasn't doing enough for my clients and felt like I was behind with helping them get results,
Mm-hmm.
not realizing that everybody has their own timeline and their own path. And
Mm-hmm.
so it wasn't necessarily, it might have been showing up in how I was servicing them, but it was more
Yeah.
of like how I was feeling before or after a session,
Yeah.
where I would feel like, ooh, I don't feel like I did much to help them, or like we're not getting results fast enough. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good as a coach. I'm really failing them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it would be like, it would feel weighed down. And then that's sometimes when I was working through my relationship with food at that time. So I
Yeah.
wasn't turning to food as much, but still there would be times where I would binge after a session, or not even binge, but just like mindlessly snack after a session,
Right.
because I
Right.
felt like I had failed my client. So it can show up there,
Wow.
or it could show up by not putting yourself out there, or being afraid to put yourself out there
Mm.
for the risk of being misunderstood or whatever, exposed, or
Yeah.
whatever your story is. It
Yeah.
can show up of just like hiding, even in some ways too.
So a lot of people say confidence will um or clarity or mindset is really the key. But if you have trauma, that could that be a mask?
I think it can be hard to get that mindfulness, or like having the confidence, if you are coming from that protective place and you don't feel that confidence, right? So
Mm,
like I'm even thinking about two things, like mindful eating, where people will say, just listen to your body. But if you're
mm,
so out of touch with your body and you haven't been in touch with it, you don't know, you don't trust it. How are
yeah.
you going to know whether how to eat mindfully or not? Or
Mm,
even, I had a conversation with a client who was saying like she really likes the health at every size movement and body positivity. And she's like, everybody's saying just love your body, which is the mindset thing, right? Just love your
right.
body, just embrace it. You should just feel beautiful no matter what. Like
Right.
everybody is beautiful, which
Right.
is true. And
Right.
she feels so on the opposite end of the spectrum right now, where she hates her body. And she's
Mm,
like, it's overwhelming to even think about, how do I get to that body love? Like, I don't even know where to start. It feels
mm,
so out of reach right now. And so,
mm,
again, that's another place where there can be a disconnect between what we think we should do with our mindset. And so, we talked about what's really important to you. Is it important to you to love your body right now? Or is it just important to feel comfortable in your body right now? And
mm.
there's a whole spectrum, right? From hate to love and everything in between. And so, what feels right for you? And where do you want to fall on that? So,
Got it.
I don't know if that answered your question,
So
but
it's more so like it sounds to me based upon what you just said is really just blocking out the noise from what everybody else is saying and really tuning in from within based upon what your needs are. Am I about right?
yeah. And sometimes we don't even know what our needs are, though,
Mm,
because we've been conditioned to believe for some people that our needs don't matter. And for other people, we're just socialized to think like,
everybody
oh, we
else.
just need to diet. We need to do this.
Yeah.
We should, as opposed to, but what do I want to choose? We're not really
Mm,
taught to think often of like, what's important to me. And that's what
yeah.
we do throughout this this Truth with Food process is really go from socialization to self-authoring and
Mm.
figuring out like, so that we can revise that story that
Yeah.
is kind of running our lives right now and getting into, but what do I want to choose? How do I want it? How do I want to be?
Yeah. So could someone improperly mask confidence though, even if they have these underlying issues?
Mhm.
Um and if they were to do that, would it still eventually lead into some level of self-sabotage?
Yes, because that form of protection too, if somebody's story is about not wanting to be exposed and feeling like they need to be perfect all the time, they can mask as like being an overachiever, being a perfectionist, and being really confident. But on the
Mhm.
inside, there's so much like feeling so much is at risk of like they have to overachieve and do so much and like put so much work and effort into things so
Mhm.
they're not seen as a failure or inadequate, and so they're protecting themselves, right, by like
Mm.
doing all of these things and they are successful, but it's eating them away inside of feeling like if they slow down or if they rest at all, then they could be exposed. And so they don't. And so that's
Mm.
sabotaging as well. And then
Yeah.
a lot of times they will end up eating at night or something because they're also exhausted and
Mm.
just like they're so focused on doing.
Yeah.
And any rest feels like they're being lazy or they're failing in other ways and that it feels exposing.
Wow. That's good. That's really good. That was really good. Um, I thought you were walking down my street for a moment until you said rest, and I was like, I enjoy my rest. I will rest in a hot second, but I can honestly, transparently say, there have been moments where I know for a fact that I have experienced because of, openly sharing levels of trauma that I've been through, have experienced the, wanting to mask, and I
Mhm.
think that's one of the reasons why I am so transparent is because of the fact that I do want to be open, but then I almost feel like I want to be open so much that I don't want nobody else to find out. So I'd rather be open than somebody to figure something out that I
Mhm.
might not have necessarily wanted to be open about. So it's almost
It's the control piece, right? Like you're controlling the narrative versus
yes,
somebody like filling in the blanks or coming up or like, yeah, that it's
yes,
you're the one that's controlling what people
yes.
know.
Oh,
That's
you
been a
oh
theme lately, actually, for many of my clients, where they are like, I'm
wow.
controlling the narrative. I only open up and share a small amount of letting people in because I don't trust them or want them to know or fill in the blanks of anything that I don't want them to know.
That trust thing is real when you've experienced a lot of disappointment and not just disappointment, manipulation,
Hmm.
maybe abuse, and so many other things that people could have experienced in their lives where trust can be betrayal, trust
Hmm.
can be hard, and I feel like it is also can block a lot as well if you
Yep.
don't trust. You can, um and not just trusting yourself, but trusting other people as well. Do you
Hmm.
feel like, honestly, do you feel like it's important to trust other people, or do you feel like, you know, people have to earn a level? Like, do you teach because of we kind of touched on it a little bit, and you were saying your clients, like, do you tell them like, it's okay for you not to trust other people, or it's okay for you to let's figure out ways where you can begin to trust other people based upon if you're trying to control so much, because if you're controlling so much, that means you're trying to control other people too, and that just
Yeah.
can lead down that same road of self-sabotage. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think it depends on what the situation is and
Mhm.
what the person, why they're doing it, and
Mm.
where, how much it's, if it is not serving them or if it's serving them in different
Got it.
ways. So it what we typically do is we try and test new behaviors throughout the process to see that you
Mm,
can be safe in
mhm.
those certain situations. So what
Got
I
it.
would say is, if it's not serving you right now and it's not feeling good for you
Mhm.
to not trust people, what happens when you do trust them? And and what's at risk if you do open up and you say something that you didn't necessarily control the narrative and something happened? Like, what's really at risk there?
Right. For
So I
sure.
think it depends. And then also trying new behaviors and seeing what happens and seeing what
Mhm.
the true, a lot of times also we're building up things to make them much bigger than they actually are. And so we don't have the full context
Yeah.
of, again, of like what really is at risk. I just had this conversation with a client on Friday who was talking
Wow.
about how she was moving overseas. She was having a ton of anxiety around the move. And as we were talking through it, she's like, I'm just daydreaming about the worst case scenario. And she was talking
Mm.
through, I was like, well, what is the worst case scenario? And so she was talking through how like she might get there and immigration, they might like reject her and all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
we talked about it a little bit more. And I said to her, like, have things not gone to plan? And what actually happened? And she
Mm.
was like, well, I'm still alive. And like nothing really, like they've all been manageable and fixable. And I was like, yeah, but when we're like that protective side of us is function, like operating things, it's
Right.
like
Anxiety be on
catastrophizing things.
100.
Yeah, making it feel like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to get deported. Like I'm never going to be able to leave the country again. And like making it into so much bigger than it actually is. But when we can
Mhm.
actually like get clear on what is really at risk, that can even help to make it feel like it's not as big. So same thing around the trust
Yeah.
thing, is even thinking about like what's really truly at risk if somebody betrays my trust,
Mm.
or if if I open up more than I'm comfortable
Yeah.
and somebody takes that information and does something with it that I'm not comfortable with. What's at
Mm.
risk there?
Right. For sure. For sure. Um, uh, this has been absolutely amazing, insightful. I loudly tell everybody, I'm happily in therapy, and this is really was eye opening. Was like, oh, mm, okay. I might
I
have to
love
note
that.
take this, and then holler at you truly soon. Um, but yes, this has been amazing. So if you can leave one piece of advice or just wisdom to an entrepreneur who is may this really resonated with them, what
Mhm.
would you say to them?
I would say don't be afraid to ask, kind of like we were talking about earlier, of like not being afraid to ask for help or
Mhm.
support, because being an entrepreneur can feel lonely. It can also be, it can feel like we're isolated in
Mhm.
it. And also, it's not uncommon for there to be some internal stuff that comes up,
For
and it
sure.
can be hard. Like, it's hard as it is, but then what it brings up in us, it can make it so much harder too.
Mhm.
So don't be afraid to ask for support, whether like depending on where you need it in your
Mhm.
business or your life. But it can be so freeing and helpful to, and can have such a big impact in so many different areas of your life by
Yeah.
just getting that support. And taking that first step is always the hardest, to ask for help. But once you get it, it can be, and getting it from the right person too, right?
Yeah.
Can be so impactful.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now I ask every guest that comes on, um, because it's called Soulful Sunday, and I've named it this because of the fact that I am a cook. I love to cook, right? And so when you eat soul food, it just fuels you. You're so full, it feels so good to your soul, right? And so I have to ask you, so if you had like a favorite food, what would that be? Like that just you're like, I can't talk to you or nobody else because I am eating right now.
usually answer that with like, it depends on the day because I love so many different types of food.
You like to eat like me.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I
Right.
like variety. Like
Yeah.
I love all different types of food, like Indian sushi and Thai and Chinese and Italian, like everything.
Yeah.
Um, but the one thing that I always love, because I don't get it that much, and I always just enjoy is like lobster and crab. Like those two things, I can
Mm.
just so good. And my mouth is watering even thinking about having some lobster because it's been so long.
So if you make a trip to Atlanta, I have to take you to a spot that really with the bull in the bag with the potatoes and the
Oh, yum.
corn. I got a spot for you.
Awesome.
Well,
I'm
thank you
there.
so much, Laura. Tell the people where they can find you. I highly, highly, highly recommend Laura because yeah, she's amazing.
Thank you.
This was so good, Laura. You
Oh, good. I'm
really,
so glad.
yeah, you really gave out a lot of helpful tips, but also I really enjoyed how you laid out the processes and even your systems within how you help your clients through. I think that was really, really good. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, people can find me at my website, which is laurabfolks.com. And then I'm also on all social media channels, not Twitter, but the others. Um, and like I mentioned earlier, I do have that free 40-minute curiosity call if this resonated with anybody and they want to explore their relationship with food or their relationship with any of those other things we talked about, like shopping
Yes.
or working out, anything like that. We can chat and see how that cycle applies to them. And I always just say, bring your curiosity and I'll bring mine and let's chat.
I love that. Yes. That was jazzy.
Thanks.
All right, y'all. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. And we will see y'all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.